Ladies and gents, PepperBelly back again with some more Interstellar Marines, and in this video I'm going to be discussing update 23 that was released yesterday, October the 30th, and with it came quite nice changes and additions and improvements. One of which that is most notable to me, of course, which is what I always tend to talk about, weapon handling. You guys remember from my last Interstellar Marines video covering update 22, you guys will know that I praised the new direction in which Zero Point Software took with the way that weapons handled to add more realism and make them feel more like real weapons. In this particular update, they did exactly the same thing, but improved it tremendously, because the revisions for weapon handling and recoil have been an ongoing process, and now it's really showing and starting to pay off in a pretty significant way. So if you guys haven't noticed already, if you've been watching my gameplay, you'll see that the sight itself has a different field of view. They adjusted the FOV for both the submachine gun and the assault rifle, in addition to weapon sway and bob through actual movement. This is one thing I have kind of always harped on in the past, because I felt that the weapon didn't tend to bob in a realistic manner, or how much it should be considering the speed you're traveling at, and now that has been rectified, and in fact, I would actually say it's very, very close to what Squad achieved in their latest update as well. It feels pretty good. Better than I've ever experienced this game before. This game is probably in the best shape right now than it ever has been in the past. And this is due just to the fact that how it feels to walk around and shoot the weapon. Like, for example, SemiAutomatic now actually doesn't have nearly as much recoil and kick as it did before in Update 22. Which is, again, an improvement because now SemiAutomatic is even more viable than it was in Update 22. Before, recoil was intense, so firing in SemiAutomatic was kind of a way to mitigate the intense recoil that you would experience over prolonged fire. And now, it's even better because it follows suit with what you would experience in the real world, where SemiAutomatic is more controllable. It's not as erratic. It doesn't surprise you. You know exactly what you're doing when you're firing an individual round and firing its quick successive shots, whereas fully automatic is a little bit more unpredictable. Now it kind of portrays that in a realistic manner. So if you're firing in semi-automatic, the weapon actually has controllable recoil and it's easier to land shots on target repeatedly versus firing it in fully automatic, which is a lot more difficult to actually control. So to me, that's a huge, huge step in the right direction, especially how before the AR kind of, although it was a huge improvement, was still a little bit over-excessive compared to what the submachine gun had in that particular update. The submachine gun was very, very easy to control, had minimal recoil, it was very consistent. Now they actually buffed up the recoil for the submachine gun, and it feels even better because it has this sense of moving slower and smooth and steady is actually going to allow you to get those quick, fast, excessive bursts on targets and actually landing every shot. That's probably one of the things I'm really thrilled about in this particular update. It's just how fluid the transition is between movement speeds when you're actually aiming down your sights. The faster you're moving, the more excessive the weapon bob and sway will be, as it would be in real life. And when you come to a standstill or move at a slower pace, it calms down a bit, making accuracy better, as you would obviously expect, and making recoil more manageable. It feels a hell of a lot more realistic now than it ever has before, and I really like what they've done with it, because now it just feels really good to move around the environment and engage threats. And in fact, if you even go into the crouching stance and you move at a faster pace, you'll notice that the sway is even slightly less than that if you were moving at the same speed standing. This is a nice touch, because in real life, when you're actually bent over like that, hugging your weapon, it is a little bit easier to control the weapon's sway because of the way you're moving and the way you're cupping and holding and gripping that weapon. So I mean, it's kind of nice, making it feel like if you want to get into a tactical kind of quick moving pace while still retaining decent accuracy, crouching down and using the fastest speed allows you to do so, which is kind of how it really works in the real world as well, depending on how you obviously move your body. So I mean, I'm happy. This update is awesome. And of course, the update isn't all about weapon handling. There's a lot of other additions as well, like the new HUD that they've implemented. It's completely different. The HUD looks entirely new. Obviously, some aspects are still similar, But for the most part, they've added new icons for team members. If your team member gets hit and they're down, there's actually a little circle reticle that counts down, indicating when they're going to bleed out, how much time they have left, with a skull over their head indicating that they are dying, and if you don't get to them soon enough, they will bleed out and die. They also have new hit markers, which at first, obviously, you're thinking hit markers are a bad idea, and you're like, why would you have hit markers? And you're probably thinking along the lines of all traditional first-person shooters like Call of Duty, Battlefield, any other game that includes hit markers. The hit markers in this game look cool as shit, alright? They're not like ridiculous hit markers where they pop up and make a sound. If you just fire at a target and it hits them, wherever the round actually hits, it'll mark that spot and it'll stay on that spot for a few seconds. So it doesn't attach to your crosshair or to your sight picture like most games, and it doesn't make an awkward sound. It just kind of shows you that this is where your bullet impacted, which is interesting because if you think about this game in terms of a sci-fi type of environment, this is in the future, it kind of makes sense that your HUD would be linked up with the weapon and it would actually show you the trajectory of your round and where it impacted, and it would actually give you a visual confirmation of where it hit. It's kind of a nice idea because if you think about it, it's similar to the way tracer rounds would work, only it shows where it hits directly on the individual themselves. If you fire at a wall, it's not going to have the hit marker at all, obviously. It's only going to show you where the impact was on a particular enemy, which to me is really cool because if you light the target up, you'll see like a few of them on the target as he falls over, and then they dissipate and disappear. They're not intrusive whatsoever, which is what I really, really like about it. Some other notable additions to the game that are actually outside of gameplay itself would be to the main menu. They added a global chat in the game so that you can actually organize games, considering the player base isn't exactly massive at the moment, so this kind of helps out with that. Obviously, it kind of makes the game feel a lot more like a free-to-play game as a result, because most free-to-play games have global chat for that exact reason. However, it works for what's currently there right now. Obviously, I'd imagine whenever the game is fully released, they would either revise it some way, like making it only visible when you go into the multiplayer tab, specific for multiplayer game modes outside of co-op and single player, and they'd probably do it in a way that's actually kind of more intuitive in that regard, instead of just having it being global for literally every single player that's playing. And a nice addition as well, that's also in the main menu that kind of goes hand in hand with the global chat, would be the actual player count, because now it actually tells you once you start the game how many people are connected and playing the game online in that moment, who are just playing it. Not so much as like, even if they're playing single player or they're playing co-op, it displays how many people are connected to the game, how many people have it running on their system. To me, this is a great addition, because if you go into the game and you're like, oh, there's nobody playing, and because none of the servers are filled, it's kind of hard to determine exactly how many people actually have the game started. Now you'll actually go in and you'll see, oh, okay, there's 50-some people playing right now. You can go into the game modes and you can try to find them, or if no one's available to see online, you can just go into the global chat, start setting something up with some players. It's a great addition, especially considering how, unfortunately, small the player base is for this game at the moment. Now let's talk about gameplay once again. Some changes that have been made specifically to the actual environments themselves would be the addition of speed trees, which is a kind of graphical addition environmental tool that is used by developers to increase the variety and the speed at which they can create foliage in games. And now with speed trees implemented for them and the game being completely turned over to Unity 5, completely converted to Unity 5, speed trees is actually being slowly implemented into the maps to replace what's currently there right now, which should net better performance for one, and also more diversity and better looking visuals and foliage. So right now the only map that currently has it is Rupture, and if you actually go and play on Rupture, if you have the game and you load it up, you'll see that they do look a lot nicer than they did in the past. Foliage actually looks more realistic, and performance has increased tenfold. So it's a very good mix, because now you're going to be able to have more foliage, more realistic looking foliage, and better performance as a result. This will be very beneficial when they actually have massive maps, and if you look at Hell Week, it would be even better for that, because that's usually the area of the game that you'll get the most performance hit. Another thing that's been actually toyed with in the past and fully rectified now would be the way the game actually remembers your weapon's settings. Before, if you actually wanted to keep your weapon on semi-automatic, every single time you would die and respawn, your weapon and the attachments would completely reset, now everything is pretty much saved. If you have a suppressor on it, and if you have your laser turned on, or your flashlight, or your weapon still on semi-automatic or burst fire, if you die and respawn, it should essentially, you would respawn with the exact same settings you were left using, only your magazine would actually be replenished, because before it wouldn't be. You would always respawn with whatever you had left in your magazine prior to death. Now it's completely rectified, it works nicely, and it makes things a lot more simplified. No, you no longer have to constantly think about respawning and adjusting your weapon again. Now you can just focus on getting back into the action to start killing some bad guys. Now the developers also took it upon themselves to fix one issue with the game, which was spawn camping, by actually adding shields to the entrances, or the exits I should say, to all the spawn points. So now you can't really fire directly into them. However, it's still possible to obviously camp somebody if they want to jump out and you're hiding underneath their spawn point. That's different. But regardless, there's not really much you can do right now, and this is a placeholder method at the moment until they can fully come up with a better concept in the future to kind of fix and alleviate the issue of spawn camping. But for now, it's a nice addition, and some of the maps actually look kind of cool with these giant ass shields just sitting outside the spawn points. But again, a temporary measure just to help mitigate that problem. Now they've also gone and added in the options menu a few additional changes, which are really nice and I'm glad to see. One is actually the ability to open up your screenshot folder in-game, as well as actually being able to adjust the resolution at which the pictures you take in-game are taken in, which is nice. Also, they added numerical values to the sensitivity sliders. This way, it's a lot easier to precisely nail down the sensitivity you want for the mouse that you currently are using and the DPI settings you have. Because before, it was kind of like you just had to kind of feel it out and determine which one you like, and now you can really adjust it by putting in the exact digit and number and decimal that you want to have your sensitivity slider at, which is good. Makes it a lot easier. So that is some of the more prominent changes in this update that I decided to cover. For everything else, check the description of this video. There will be a link to the actual changelog, and you can go read through it yourself and see every minor detail in the changes that have occurred in this particular update. But for now, my name has been PepperBelly. Thank you guys for joining me today, and I'll see you guys on the next one.